Again, thanks a million, Brooke, for letting me participate with GSI. Just a little bit about my company. It's TopOps, so we are partners with GSI. You can acquire our software through GSI, and they do the implementations for us, do a lot of our implementations. So we are an AI for sales forecasting and pipeline management solution. And that's where we get a lot of the data that we're going to be talking about today. As well as I'll talk from the perspective of my background. My background is before I founded TopOps, I founded two companies. One is you might have heard of these two. Host Analytics, which is a enterprise performance management in the cloud, and also a company called Gainsight, which is the leader in customer success software. So these were things that came up a lot, and you know, today we're going to be talking about key performance indicators, and they're going to be supporting what our jobs depend on, many of our jobs, and that's hitting the number. And so we have these KPIs that are out there, but we end up in this game. So we'll talk a little bit about what that game is and how we end up in this game. You know, as we set these KPIs and track them and talk to different folks. And what we're shifting to in order to get the full story of the KPIs. And that comes from these different perspectives that you should be looking at KPIs. So we don't want to look at it from just one perspective, because I think that's like at best about 25% of the story. So if we look at you know, like my experience, you know, the good news is if we get this right, you know, what we're going to talk about here today, we can get a good lift out of it. And the bad news is I believe most of us have been looking at this the wrong way. And so in my experience, we've always been managing for expectations of our investors. So I've mentioned two companies that, you know, I've had experience in that, again, by the way, the executive teams and the management teams and a lot of the operations folks, they were absolutely awesome, most incredible people I've worked with, and I learned a lot from them. But these are common problems that everybody experiences. I would hope that there's a lot of people shaking their heads in as I discuss some of these things. But you know, you get kind of forced into managing expectations as you're setting your KPIs and your numbers. If you're institutionally venture-backed, you're setting them for the board. And you're setting them to not lose. So, you know, you don't want to lose your bonus. You certainly don't want to lose your job. And so that's really, you know, I think we can all talk about how that's done and really drill into how that's hurting the business. So what we would do is we would set these numbers, and the board, I was on the board of these companies, and we would always say not enough. And so we ended up with this game that just happened between, you know, the sales reps and the management, sales managers negotiating this number. You know, the management team would then come to the board. And so this was just kind of an ongoing thing, because we had certain numbers to hit. The investors had to get a return. They had to get the velocity they needed. Yet the reps were faced with the reality of, you know, what the current situation was. So there was this ongoing negotiation, and you know, it really, you know, a lot of companies face similar situations, and it's really not the best thing for the company. And mostly the reason we end up playing this game is that we just don't have good enough information. And, you know, so we end up doing a lot of guesswork and filling in the blanks where we don't have the data. And so now we're forced into just proving what I said was going to happen. So we just have to get to that number somehow. And so we go all the way to the end of the quarter. You know, we set the number up front, you know, pipeline looked good at the time. but things happen, surprises happen, and I had an awesome management team. Both companies had awesome management teams, and then we would go all the way to the last couple of weeks of the quarter. Usually end up plus or minus 5% of the number, but man, like it was just a really mad scramble, and wasn't setting us up well for future quarters of the company. So and a lot of things happen, because we're working off of bad data. We're we end up with a lot of things happening, a lot of things getting out of whack, because there's we're hiring. When do we hire reps? What kind of marketing spend do we have? What do we spend it on? Setting quotas, those kind of things. And so so these were all things that just it was just this insanity that happened. And now there is a shift that's occurring, and we're still looking at the same KPIs, but we're looking at different perspectives. And so we need to know the full story. Like current technology, and a lot of this relies on the technology that you're using, because it's really, you could hire 100 analysts and they can get you 100 different reports to look at all these different perspectives, but that isn't productive either. I mean, that's just as a nightmare for the sales ops team, and it's so it's what you really do is need to rely on current technology. Some of the old, or most of the old BI tools that we're using today, again, you could hire a bunch of analysts and and try and get them to create a bunch of separate reports, but they're really just telling us what, and we can't really get the full story by just handing them this list, ongoing infinite list of different perspectives to create reports. It just doesn't scale well, and it's just not efficient for the company. And ultimately, the answers we're trying to get are, what is the lead quality? Of course, we want to know quantity, and that's what these BI tools are good at. They're good at getting quantity, and we're all sold on that, right? We got all these sales automation tools. They're going to get us more of the quantity, more leads, more sales. In fact, I remember reading a great blog about from this book, the Sales Manager's Survival Guide was a book that also references this story, where it was determined by the management that if you just increase the number of proposals, you'll increase the win rates. And of course, that happened. It went the opposite way. The reps did what they were told. They increased the number of proposals, but of course, the win rate went down. It didn't help increase wins. It just meant more proposals went out there. I mean, that's an easy metaphor that we all know, like, of course that doesn't work, but we do get kind of fixated on this. Let's get more leads. Let's get more of these, but we don't have the checks in place. We just assume they're going to happen, or we hope they're going to happen, rather, for the quality checks. And then, so there's the quality of leads that are filling the pipe. That's important, but there's the quality of opportunities and how they're worked. Are they being worked properly? So we need to do the right things to track that. So we're going to get into KPIs here in just a minute, but I'm just doing this setup of why we're going to be looking at these KPIs and why we look at them the way they do. So so to get the full story, as I mentioned, what we're missing, we get the quantity, but we lack the quality. And we may check the quality now and then. Like, most of us have the ability to go in and say, okay, let's look at the closed won deals and see what the lead source was. So most of us have that capability, but we'll look at it at a point in time, but we don't really track the frequency of it to see, are we really acting on what we said? Do we really we said, hey, we should do more of these. Seems like these are the good leads. So are we really acting on it? And indeed, was that the case, or was that just a one-time deal? And so it's so important. I mean, we can simply go, well, of course I look at trends, but are you looking at the trends through the different perspectives? And so that's a key thing, that you can switch at the speed of your thought on these different perspectives as you look at trends and try and identify, if we're actually executing on things. We want to see them at that point in time, but until we get to the point where we can track trends, we're not going to really be able to see the quality. And so the things that we're going to look at is pipeline flow, how things flow through there, the win rates, the cycle times, and then the changes that occurred in the pipeline, like what happened. So it's a little bit, so it isn't like, hey, we're going to look at the this percentage of this or whatever. Of course, we're going to look at these kind of things, but I'm really looking at them as more of as a strategy goal. And so we'll definitely get into looking at these things, and that's so important. So if we think about the pipeline flow, it is absolutely necessary to have a good buyer-seller journey defined. And what I mean by that is we want to see how the leads advance from stage to stage. A very simplistic example would be from a good qualified prospect to call on, booking the meeting, attending the meeting, the reps accepting the lead to work because she or he will believe that they could get them to engage in the an actual opportunity. Then we qualify it further. Then we work it as an opportunity all the way to a close. And then there's maybe another few stages after that. But that is defined based on how the buyer buys and how the seller sells. And so that's why it isn't just a buyer journey. It's a buyer-seller journey. So that's got to be defined for this pipeline flow. And then we can see how we fill the leads at the top of the funnel and how they work through. Then I'll talk to you about like how win rate. There isn't like, you ever get that? It's like, hey, what's our win rate? It isn't, I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, sit down for, 15 minutes and we'll go through the different ways of looking at win rate. So there's so many ways to look at that. Same with the cycle times. And then of course we have to see like, how well we work things through the pipeline. And that's why it's important to see, get a good idea of the pipeline change. Let me alert you. I recreated some of the screens from our software so I could, emphasize some points. Some of it might get a little confusing. So, but I'm telling you, once you start digging in with your data, it's like, oh my gosh, now you can really get to answers because you can spin through and see different perspectives. So first off, let's talk about pipeline flow, and that is absolutely important to really put some rigor around this, because this is how you get your quality, how you track how it's filling at the top, how the reps are working the opportunities. It is absolutely important thing to really put a lot of rigor into this pipeline flow. And so, excuse me. So let's look at these metrics that we're looking at here on the left. So I got MQLs. Most of us know that means marketing qualified leads. Then we have sales qualified leads. So that means the sales reps, are they're qualified for the sales reps. And there's definitions around all of these that should be based on your company and how your buyer seller journey works. This is a very simplified flow here, and it's very summarized. So it's MQL, so marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, then they turn into opportunities, and then you get some wins. So at the very, very simplest way to look at how this flows, we're looking at January new marketing qualified leads. So of these new marketing qualified leads, of these hundreds, they turned into 80 SQLs, then 10 opportunities, and then 5 wins that came out of them. So that's of the new ones that came through January. And the differentiator that we're focused on here is to improve the quality of, make sure that these leads are the kind of people we want to talk to. It's including all the different members of the buying group. That's another important, we can talk a half hour on the buying group. And that they're qualified opportunities, that we know what questions to ask and what to focus the prospect on what thing, the pain points and, what's really important and compelling, and why that's so important. So that's a key thing that we do here, is that, that's the differentiator, rather than just saying what were MQLs for January, what were SQLs for January, and because if we look over here to the right with the reverse video to the the right side of this screen, we could look at open deals for January too. So that means of all the deals that are open, which means that can be actively worked. They may not be scheduled to close for January. They may, they're in various stages, but it's the open. So in this case, we just changed a couple of the numbers. We said we've still got 100 MQLs coming in, but and usually we work the MQLs in or out of the SQLs right away. But in this case, there's 10 more SQLs, right, than the January new. There was 80 new, but there was 10 of the SQLs left over from last month. And there were 10 new opportunities that came in from those 100 MQLs, but there were 20 that were in there from a previous period. So, and then ultimately we won 10 of all of these, versus just 5, over to the left where we just won 5 of the new. But see how, like, on the left, we looked at just these new MQLs that came in and what happened to them. And on the right, we're looking at the whole picture. So I think that's number one. We got to make sure that we can look at these different perspectives, because they tell us different things. Because I've been in a lot of board meetings where I get like one perspective. I might get a VP of sales that has a really, really good handle on this, but they may not really tell the story of, they may not need to get into the minutia, but we need to know, like, that of the 100 MQLs that came in, this is what happened. And and then we need to know, like, when these things happened. And then to the right, we just got to know, like, overall what we got and what to expect, because our reps are actively working these deals. And then we look at scheduled to close. So, that would be like they were scheduled to close for January. And, are the reps managing their business? Are they closing them when they should be closed? So, now let's look at it again. So we're looking at the same pipeline flow metrics, and we're getting the full story. Now it gets a little tricky here, but I'm telling you, if you get this right, you will get a lift in your win rates of all of this as a lead comes in and your opportunities, and it's going to be so helpful for marketing, so helpful for the reps. So let's go through this, okay? You with me? Let's venture through this, and it'll be good. As you work with this on a regular basis, it's going to be a really, really good thing. So I recreated this screen of what you should be using automation to track. So on the pipeline flow metrics, if we look here at the top, we see in blue new, open, and scheduled to close. So we just went through what new, open, and scheduled to close means. And so we're in this example, we're going to look at the new. So we're looking at new, and I'll get to that in a minute. So the second thing, we're looking in the hierarchy. We may want to look at like the whole company and a team. In this case, we're just looking at a rep. This is one of our hotshot sales reps that we have on staff at Top Ops, Tim McMillan. Now the sales period we're looking at is by month. So you either, in this case, we wanted to look at, I'm going to go down here a second here. If you see in blue, I selected MQL. So we're selecting new MQLs for these 3 months. So all the new MQLs that came in for January, then we're going to look at February and March. And we just want new business. We could look at upsells. We don't want to look at like upsells and renewals or something like that. So the sales process is different, but you got to have those separately defined because they're all very, very important. And then we look at the closed in the period or current status. So I may just say of the 100 MQLs, how many closed in January? And if I have, a business, I'm trying to manage it to close deals in 30 days, then yeah, that would be important. If not, I might usually select current status. I might check closed in period to see if I get any, because sometimes I get deals that close in 30 days, but sometimes it takes 60 days, sometimes it takes 90 days. So it just depends on your sales cycle, and that's why that's another key metric we're going to get to here in a second. But if I look at this now, so I got this set up, so we're looking at 100 new, it's new here, current status of these 100 MQLs that came in January, February, and March. So we're looking at the 100 that came in January, 80 turned into SQLs, 65 turned into stage 1 opportunities, 30 changed into stage 2. So, you know, 30% advanced to here. And I think conversion rates are cool and good to know, but you can get a little noisy in what you look at. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things you can look at. So over here to the right, I'm looking at the win rate. So it's actually saying in the ultimate, it may not have happened this month, but whenever it happened, how much of these did we win? What's the current status of that? And here it's saying of these SQLs, we won 10% of them. And so, again, I only filled out, normally, you know, you could fill out all these numbers depending on what you select, but, oh, sorry about that. But I only filled out what I'm trying to stress as far as making a point about. And so the reason I put the win rate of this sales qualified lead is because by looking at the win rate, I can tell when is it really for us a qualified lead. The normal answer I get, like I'll ask a VP of sales and they'll go, when's it a qualified lead, or a VP of marketing or CMO? And it's like, well, it's when they got this, 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 and this. That's when it's a qualified lead. And that's good, and that's true. But I like to look at the numbers. I really like to say, well, here's when I think you have a qualified lead. It seems like when you get it at this sales qualified lead stage, that's when you have a qualified lead. Because if you look at it, we got in January, we got 10% of these 80 that we want. We'll get to February, March here in a minute, but like 10% to me in my business, that's when I did. So I got the right person we're calling on. If I win 10% of them, I'm happy. So that's of the leads. But when they engage with us, I want to win at least 1 in 4. I want to beat that number. So if we look, when it gets down to stage 2, that's when it becomes compelling enough that we win 1 in 4. So it's at 25%. Now let's go ahead and look at February, March. If we look here, of the 100 MQLs that came in February, we only 64 advanced to SQL, and we only won 2% of them. So that's interesting. The quality, I've got the first sign that only 64 made it to SQL versus the normal 80, and of the 64, we only won 2% of those. So that's not very much. And then in March, it seems like we course corrected. We got it back up in the 80s again. We beat January. We also beat January on the win rates because we ended up winning 11% of those. We may not have won them in the month. We might have won them in later months, but it just helps me to understand. If I just look at things at one point in time, it doesn't jump out what the problem is. If I'm only interviewing the reps or only looking at, like, you know, a lead source and what happened in one lead source, like, you got to do those things, right? But you got to look at the trends, the frequencies, and see how often, you know, things are in line and really working, and when they fall out of whack. So obviously in February, we got a bad bunch of MQLs. And so marketing looks at that and says, oh yeah, we tried this new thing, or we were putting in new automation for our SDRs, and that, you know, caused a little blip there. But you see, we got it course corrected back into March. We're back up to where we were, and we're beating January, and we expect to do better in April. So, you know, just things like that where you can see, it's good to have this empirical data in front of you that you can, but now I also want to flip it to the open and the schedule to close, because that's more interesting to me as I look at stage 1, 2, and 3 opportunities. In this case, I'm not even going to look at stage 1 opportunities. I'm going to look at them at stage 2 and 3, because when they get there, it looks like we win on average 25%. Again, we had a bad bunch of MQLs in February. The ones that came in February, we only won 10%. But of course, corrected again. The ones in March, where, those new ones, we got back up over 25% again. So that means they're good qualified opportunities. Now, it's another story to ask the reps on top of all they got to do to put these deals in the proper stages. And that's what comes into pipeline inspections. And so talk to us about that. We'll show you how artificial intelligence and what we do to make that happen, to make sure those are ensured that they end up in the right opportunities, because that's a problem in itself. Because you get, you have sandbaggers, and you tend to lean towards sandbagging or happy years. I'm a reformed happy years sales rep, and so it's always good to have a good process, even better than validation rules. We got something better than that. So anyway, that's what we're looking at for pipeline flow. That's how this works. But you see the different perspectives of seeing new versus open versus scheduled to close. Let's see here. So we only have a couple things left here to cover. Win rates, another one. So we touched on win rates. Win rates have 4 categories to them. And of the win rates, we will see wins and losses. So that's important to see how we do, as long as you have a good, regimented, disciplined process to close deals out. You gotta make sure, if you never close things out, how are you going to know what your true win rate is, right? I mean, it's that's, so a lot of people just go off of that. But I like to see that, because that gives my overall performance, because I know that our reps have a good, rigorous process to close things out when they should. So that gives me a good take on their performance as I compare reps, on win rates. But I also want to look at what we call the schedule to win rate. Some people call it the close rate. That's, but we think that the term should be scheduled to win rate, because it tells it what it was. It was scheduled to win that period. So in the period, and this happens, right? I've had plenty, that pushed. I told you I was, the king of the happy years reps. And so I had plenty that put. Fortunately, I could close them later. But getting the date right for me was a tough thing. My boss would shake his head a lot with me on previous companies. But anyway, the schedule to win rate is the number of wins over what you did win in that period, what you lost in that period, and then what pushed that was scheduled to close for that period into the following period. I don't care that it was scheduled to close for January and you closed it in February. That's not a push. It's only a push if your period is the month. If your period is the quarter, it wasn't a push, at least in my book. And so you want to see, like, in the designated period, did it put, because sometimes they push, it'll go later, something will come up, a surprise will happen, and you got to close it later than what you originally thought. But I like to track it for the sales period, whether it's a quarter or a month. Then we want to look at, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit more on that. So number 3 here is we want to look at the win rate based off of qualified leads. So like I told you, for us in my business, 10%, as long as we beat 10%, I'm good. We have an awesome marketing director, and some months she really kills it, and then other months she's just like really, really good. So anyway, as long as we get like a win rate of 10% of the leads, I know, we're getting good quality, and we're getting better and better at it. And so opportunities, it's 25% is what's good for our business. We sell a new concept, and that's how we run the business. So we don't have a very mature market. Our market is one where we're just introducing a lot of new concepts and showing people, like, hey, you got a problem, and I know you have a problem, but you don't think there's any solution. So we have to convince them that there is, and so that's what takes a little bit of extra time for us. And then those opportunities expected to close in the period. Once we get them engaged and we have them to where they're expected to close in that period, we should win 50%. And as I mentioned a second ago, you want to design these based on, do you have a new concept that you're selling, or do you have a mature market where you end up with a lot of competes? It usually gets down to, maybe 2 people competing, and and it's a go or no go, based on whether you beat that competitor. So that's how you design the win rates. So it's not just one answer on that. Now, in the cycle time, I like to pick the stage to start counting. That's the first thing on the velocity of it. So when someone says, like, what's your cycle time, Jim, for a typical sale, or your average cycle time, or something like that, I start counting when it's a sales accepted lead. And before that, so it might stick in there several, for a long time before that. And but so you'll get this false information, like, oh my gosh, it took 360 days to close this deal. Well, no, it really didn't become a lead that the rep engaged fully with until the last 2 months or something like that. So that you got to know when to start. Now, you can look at velocity by stage too, and that's something we look at, and I think that's super important. But I think, like, you got to make sure that you're looking at different sales cycles, or sales processes rather. And so a renewal is going to be different than new business, and in new business, if you're working SMB or mid-market or enterprise deals, it's all going to be different. So that kind of goes hand in hand with ASP, like the average selling price. But also you got to look at it by rep, because different reps, of course, you're going to have fully ramped reps versus not fully ramped reps. You usually you have different cycles. By the way, there's a guy named Dave Kellogg. If you go to Kellblog, KELLBLOG.com, he's got a great model on how to create. I mean, he's got great blogs in general, and he's got a good model on based on ramped reps, and so and how to count, how to do a model to set a forecast based on ramped reps. It's very good. Okay, so then on cycle times, we mentioned, like, there's average time to win, but another key one we got to look at is average time to close it out, or we have it as average time to loss. But I want to make sure that the reps are disciplined about that and not just leaving opportunities out there. And then in addition to average, I want to look at high and low, and because it's I want to see, like, what's the characteristics of the deals that went super quick, and what was the characteristics of the ones that took a long time. And usually it's a big enterprise account, things like that. So and then lastly, now this is one I had to steal this from our software. Now again, you're going to go, okay, your eyes are going to pop out with this, but it's really, really cool if you had this, and it takes but a few minutes to get the hang of it. So if we look at, in this case, what I did is I selected a flow of what happened to my best case, and you see it's flowing into 3 different areas, and I'm just looking at the period that I'm analyzing, how well things turned out. In this case, I selected the top bar because it said one deal went up, and so you see some go up, some go up and some go down, some stay neutral. Nothing happens to them. But in this case, one went up, and if I drilled into that, I could see that, is that 5,000 an actual deal, or, it's maybe a small deal, or maybe they just upped the amount. So we can also, see that. And then it flowed over from best case to commit. So that was a good thing. So that deal went up in value and flowed over to commit, or it just was a small deal that just went up to commit, advanced. So you can see all the different things based on the period. If I'm analyzing July, if I'm analyzing, from any period, But it's very important to see either by, in this case, we're looking at forecast categories, or we can look at by stage, how things advanced. But your pipeline, you got to look at, you know, how successful you're in your pipeline. You know, are you closing a lot of deals out, or you're losing? But you don't want a lot of these things flowing to lost. That would be a problem. Excuse me. So to sum everything up, if you really get this right, you could definitely maximize your sales growth. Your win rates are going to go up. There's research out there. If you go to Serious Decisions, Gartner, CSO Insights, I like those three a lot, and you'll see that they generally talk about different improvements, but I kind of worked them all out to where it's like, if you've got this kind of rigor and you're watching your metrics so you can see the full story like this, you'll be able to get up a lift of up to like I think one says 11%, one says 13%, and of course they've got the research too to show like the sales cycle time will definitely reduce. So you have a much better organized team when you're analyzing these things, and you can really get the full story of the health of all your key sales metrics. And then the other thing is your lead, you'll be investing in the right things for leads, and you'll be hiring at the right times, because you'll be able to see the full story on the pipeline and when you really need to hire, because you'll know that your win rates are where they should be, the pipeline's where they should be. Now I can hire. If you hire before that, you're wasting that poor person's time that you just hired. So you do all these things, you'll be able to manage your business to win and not just to not lose like I used to do. And again, I credit our partners, GSI. If you want to hear more about this, please contact them or us. We've got some guidebooks at our site. If you go to topops.com and go to the resources, you'll be able to pull down these guidebooks, how to incorporate these same methodologies into your QBRs, and some other tips on how to incorporate these best practices. So Brooke, thanks very much. I think if we've got some questions, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Let me know if you can see my screen. Can you see it okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much. That was great. I just want to cover a few follow-up items, and then we'll move on to our question and answer section of the webcast. Today's webcast is part of GSI's free ongoing educational webcast series, and our upcoming webcasts are currently listed on the screen. And if you'd like to register for any of these free educational webcasts, you can go out to our website at getgsi.com. Also, if you would like to sign up for our weekly emails on upcoming webcasts or our monthly newsletter, you can go to getgsi.com, go to the bottom of the screen, and click on the link for each. All right, so Jim, it looks like we already have several questions here. Let's see.
The effort required to keep the information accurate and collect the right information so we can measure it. Let's see. So while we were trying to measure the right KPI, I got one here, Brooke, that I'm looking at here. Let's see. Our biggest challenge is the effort required to keep the information accurate and collect the right information so we can measure it. So so I guess I wonder what they're using now. I'm going to get some help on this actually here. From what do you think? What would you say, Rick, on this?
So what's the question?
So while we are challenged with measuring the right KPIs, our biggest challenge is the effort required to keep the information accurate, collect the right information so we can measure it.
So a lot of companies have that problem, and what they're using in a lot of cases is Excel. and that just makes the problem worse. What you need is a solution that captures the information as part of the process. So it captures the collection of leads, it captures the movement of stages, it captures the sales activity, so you can measure all of that and not worry about the collection. This is kind of a new area. It's an area that we're in. There are only just a few companies like us in it, but I mean, to answer your question, a lot of companies start with Excel, and then the wheels fall off, then they go to a BI tool, and then the wheels fall off, and then, hopefully they start collecting it as part of the process like we do.
Okay. There's one more, Brooke, before I want to answer. I want to make sure I get one I can answer. And so here's what it says. Your site talks about AI. How does AI play into this? So obviously someone came into our site. They heard me probably mention the words artificial intelligence. So AI plays a part. It plays a lot of different parts. You don't want to just say, hey, let's plug this in and let's let the system learn how we do business. And so what we do, it's like several tiers of AI. Some is fully functional machine learning, artificial intelligence. Some of it is what they call augmented intelligence. And then some of it is based off of just the technology where we built it in that we know, we are a company where this has been built on the backs of sales leaders. There's been a lot more than me. There's like a ton of people in this company itself are advisors. So there's a lot that we just know from several, add us all up, but there's, hundreds of years of experience there. And but just to give an example, the AI we have for the forecast, it'll take into all of these things, including learning how you do things now. But we have ways of recognizing when things just kind of pop up. Sometimes reps hold on to things and then they close loss right away. So we recognize those kind of things. So these are just different examples of what we use those three categories. It's basically the full benefits of AI and machine learning, the augmented learning, and then our algorithms itself. But we also take into effect the sentiment analysis. That's a key part of all of this. And again, it falls into those three categories where we have libraries that we exist now, plus we learn as we go what happens, good and bad. Excuse me. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to this, like how does AI come into play? But it affects the forecast and it affects the sales process, and that's where we get a lot of benefit. And that way, through all three of these, we'll get unbiased measurement of the data.
Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you so much for your presentation today. It was great. And thank you guys so much for your questions. Just as a follow-up from today's webcast, we ask that you complete a short 1-minute survey when you exit, and you will be receiving an email with a link to the Resource Center on our website where you can access the recording from today's webcast, as well as a copy of the presentation. And then after today's webcast, we will also do the drawing for the $25 Amazon gift card, and anyone that attended the entire webcast and completes the survey will be eligible, and we will notify the winner. I just want to say thank you again to Jim and your team and everybody for attending our presentation, and we hope that you have a great day.
Thanks, Brooke. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.